Yeah, welcome everyone to a new episode of this podcast. Today we'll be talking about the Belarusian election that happened last year and the protests and the demonstrations that followed it. And my guest is my former PhD colleague, Mantė Žemaitytė, who lives 30 kilometers from the Belarusian border from Belarus's border with Lithuania. She's in Lithuania now. And okay, welcome, Mantė, to this podcast. So before I start with my questions, let me just speak a bit about, and you can correct me if I get some of the facts wrong. Let me speak a bit about what happened. So since 1994, Belarus has had presidential elections in, I believe, 94, 2001, 2006, 2010, and then 2020. Oh, was there one in 2015? And basically what happens is every time Lukashenko gets a thumping majority, well, except 94, I think in 94 he got 44%, but not a thumping majority nonetheless. And it is widely believed to be true that the elections are neither fair nor transparent, and like the whole system, the whole polity lacks electoral integrity. And what happened in 2020 was very galling because this time Lukashenko got 95% of all votes, which was like quite a number even for him, because in the elections preceding the 2020 election, his percentage was something like 77, 79, 84, but never in the 90s. So this time it was in the 90s. But of course, it's no laughing matter because after that, people agitated, there were protests, there were demonstrations, and lots of people died. There were reports of torture, sexual assault, rape, and well, it is still a grim aftermath of whatever happened last year. And Mantė, I'm guessing since you lived so close to the border, what you got to see things like from up close in a way. So yeah, can we just start a bit? Can we start by asking you what your reading of the situation was, like starting from like the election last year and say now, all the way up to now?
Yeah, arguably, the first election was the only fair one, and about the other ones, I don't know. But the last one, it was August 2020, I believe, and I even know someone, and I will not name names, but I know someone who actually was supposed to monitor the elections, so that to ensure that they are transparent and fair. And the idea would be that there would be an independent person sitting in one of the posts and just observing what is happening with the voting. And from the first lips, the story was that they would be let in for maybe 15 minutes at a time, just to come in and observe, and then would be not allowed in the room. So I think there's no doubt that the election was rigged by the accounts of people who were meant to ensure that it wasn't. And for me, it was a question why this year? Why not in previous elections? Yeah. Why there weren't such massive protests? And it seems to me, I can think of, two reasons. One of them being that with the COVID situation, with the pandemic, it seems that a lot of countries are observing this sort of people being very unsatisfied with their leaders, the governments. And the second one would probably be that now you have, YouTubers, bloggers, these like movements, and it seems that they have been uniting. And it's just people started organizing and going into the streets to protest the rigged election. And I think there's a very interesting story of what is happening also with the election, is that you have the opposition leaders who are trying to oppose Lukashenko. They are being charged with bogus charges. Yeah. And after that, of course, they cannot run against Lukashenko. So aside from, rigged election, there's also, elimination of candidates that are opposing Lukashenko. And one of them was Sergei Tsikhanouski.
Oh, the YouTube guy. the YouTube blogger.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, he got like some charges. I obviously not an expert of the situation, but been following it. So yeah, he was eliminated from the election because of like some thing that he supposedly did.
Yeah.
So what he did is that he started collecting signatures for his wife. So he collected the signatures, and his wife was meant to oppose him. But what we have is that she now lives in exile in Lithuania and is leading the opposition. So that's how it kind of touched quite closely Lithuania, as there were some other people.
And yeah, and wasn't the wife the candidate who came second in a way, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya?
Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, yeah. So she, she did come second, and it seems
like
that
4%. She got 4%.
Yeah, so it seems that Lukashenko he eliminated all the candidates, and it appears that everyone sort of believes that Tsikhanouskaya actually, of course, collected many more votes and probably would have won.
Yeah.
And well, the election results do not say that. So as a result, we shouldn't call Lukashenko the president of Belarus, as he's not in Lithuania. He's not regarded as, right? So I like how in American, for example, press, you see him called Mr. Lukashenko and not President.
Not President Lukashenko.
Yeah. And in terms of, I live 30 kilometers away from the border, but you could almost say hundreds, because I don't actually see anything that would indicate of what's happening. But the border is about 700 kilometers long across the, between Belarus and Lithuania. And in the summer, when I was really quite close to the border, but not near Vilnius, I could see, Frontex, what you call them, Frontex. They are the EU border police, let's say.
Okay.
So it's like to do with the migrant crisis.
Right.
So I could see. So I think for the people who live, just like 5-10 kilometers from the border, I think it's really. I was there for maybe a couple of hours, but it seemed like there's police, there's the Frontex police, there's the some army vehicles and so on. So it's really can be felt in the territory.
Yeah, I think. I mean, sorry if I'm interrupting. I think more so with Poland, because Poland and Belarus, they have quite a history of there was this incident where. Like a lot of human rights abuses were being committed by the Belarusian authorities against Polish people living in Belarus. And there was a conspiracy that this is, I think, back from the mid 2000s, like mid noughties, conspiracy that the Polish government was trying to, bring about a change of government. Of course, those conspiracies are bullshit, but that's what tyrants do when they want to lock people up. But yeah, so sorry, did I interrupt you? Were you saying?
No, but your question was, of I guess the feeling of what is happening overall. So I think, while it's not, I cannot see it every day that this is actually happening, but you always feel this kind of slight anxiety about the situation on the other side.
And so. What are the countries that have land borders with Belarus? So it's Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. Or am I missing something? That's it, right? So I mean, so my question is: so Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya took refuge in Lithuania, not any of the other countries. Are there any specific reason why that was the case? What do you think?
I guess there are, but I would not speculate. But I guess, at least it seems to me that Lithuania has been the loudest supporter
Okay.
of the Belarusian people. And around the election, like before the election, I think Belarus started entering the press sort of worldwide about, at first just like something happening, people protesting,
Right.
Incarcerations, and so on and so on. Then the election, and after the election, there was huge protests, massive protests, and a lot of people being arrested. And as you've mentioned, physical violence against them. And now, for instance, it's even worse, I think. So it's been just getting worse and worse since 2020 of August. And now I think you can get arrested for just having a photo of the blue and white nationalist flag on your phone, or being like a girlfriend of someone who participated in the protests. So back in, I think it was August 2020, maybe September, that Lithuania did like a initiative that I mentioned to you, the Belarusian Way, maybe it was called, which is a sort of, since Lithuania, before Lithuania regained independence, there was actually all of the Baltic states. There was an initiative called the Baltic Way, where people held hands from, I believe, Tallinn to Vilnius. So across 3 countries, people were holding hands, and my parents were there, and a lot of people either were there or their parents were there. And it seemed, what people recall, they say it seemed like everyone was there. They would go, from tiny villages, just go find the chain and hold hands. And it just really showed the sort of the size of the movement of wanting to be independent again. And as a similar initiative, it was organized for Belarus, where people held hands from Vilnius to Belarusian border. So Belarus and Russia don't really like Lithuania for those kind of things. And I think because of that strong support for those people in Belarus, I think maybe it could be one of the reasons why Svetlana Tikhanovskaya ended up in Lithuania.
Okay. And also, of course, I'm sure you followed this incident when it happened. There was the Ryanair 4978 incident. So there was this Ryanair flight flying from Athens to Vilnius, and there was a journalist on board, a Belarusian journalist called Roman Protasevich. Protasevich, yes. Yeah. And the plane was told by the authorities at Minsk airport that there was a bomb threat and that they needed to touch ground in Belarus, for safety reasons. And once they did that, of course, Roman Protasevich was removed from the plane and detained. So small incidents like that seem to indicate that there is, even if Lukashenko stays in power and no one goes into Belarus to remove him from power, he is not going to be happy with just that. He's also eager on curbing press freedom, curbing freedom of speech, and other kinds of human rights, what he would view as excesses. Why do you think? Why do you, if we were to speculate, why would a tyrant want that extra bit? Just win an election and stay in power. Why care about all these extra points?
Well, it seems to me that the protests, one could say, have died down, right?
Yeah, since March this year, I think they have died down a bit.
Yeah, but not because they did, right? Because people were being arrested, charged, and I think, for example, that flight, I think it's just, imagine how scared you must feel, right? If you are flying from one EU country
to another EU country.
If another person, and he was just, I think he was just posting in a Telegram channel,
Okay.
Right, maybe
Okay.
he was posting, I don't know, but it seems like he wasn't a central figure or anything like that. Maybe he was one of the louder speaking people against Lukashenko, but
by he we mean, by he, like for the listeners, we mean Roman Protasevich, the
Roman Protasevich.
Yeah.
So if you are just a simple person in Belarus and you see that this person flying from one EU country to another, his flight is deterred, landed in Minsk, and the person is taken, as well as his girlfriend Sofia Sapiega,
who was Russian, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
While at the same time a student in Lithuania.
Okay.
And they are both taken off the plane. Lithuanian passengers on the plane, other passengers from other countries on the plane. Plane is, landed in Minsk, and then after, I don't know, was it several hours or the next day, we see Protasevich, saying that, oh yes, I did wrong, that I spoke against and so on, and his nose is crooked. It seems like it's been broken. It's terrifying. And for people in Belarus, if someone, if these measures can be taken against someone like Roman Protasevich, it just produces a lot of fear in people, I believe.
That's right.
So it's just one example of how Lukashenko is trying to just scare the people. He believes that he can do it with, his absolute power in Belarus right now. So that's where the sanctions really took off, I think, after the landed plane.
And do you know anything about what the, let's say, political mood is in Lithuania for the crisis in Belarus, as in within the political circles? Like, what is there anything like a standard opinion that, oh, we must do this, or oh, we must welcome immigrants, or we should support this or support that, or is it still like not clear?
So it's like, I feel two stories, but of course, extremely interconnected. The migrant crisis and political situation in Belarus. So the Lithuanian stance is certainly that Lukashenko is not the president of Belarus. And because of the recent history of Lithuania, I think people are very, really relating to people in Belarus. I think also they have really close ties with Russia, of course. And while Lithuania, since regaining independence, has been moving slowly towards the West, and even, I think there's no doubt that Putin, Kremlin, Russia tried to intervene with the US elections. They certainly tried to intervene in Lithuanian elections, and of course, Belarusian elections as well. So in Lithuania, we had one president that was impeached and removed from power because of his ties with Russia. Whereas in Belarus, it seems that, since the first election of Lukashenko, it's, the ties with Russia have not been severed. They're quite interdependent. Belarus seems like, okay, the economy was growing, but, it must stop at some point where you have huge corruption, just sort of very centralized everything. And it seems like Russia is just, feeding Belarus to not collapse financially, but Belarus is just very strongly, dependent on Russia. So Lithuanian people, of course, relate to Belarusian people who want to have the future of Belarus in their own hands, of course. And of course, you will find people that will say that will support Lukashenko, but it will be, I guess, a small minority of older population. And right. So about Belarus, Yeah, and I guess, but there's also, yeah, I have to mention there's, like there would be a tiny minority of people that will sort of support Lukashenko, but as anywhere. But there's maybe a bigger minority that says that Lithuania shouldn't intervene, and what is happening by the border is our own fault. But here, you see the battle of values, let's say, right? What do you value more? Like being quiet and agreeing with what's happening on the other side of the border, or showing, that you do not accept that and push for the sanctions because of the human rights violations, basically, that are happening in Belarus. And I think Belarus is probably in top 5 countries in the world of the most imprisoned people. Feel free to fact check this.
I'm gonna look. It should be a very interesting list.
Please do. Yeah, but I believe that I believe that it would be because people being maybe imprisoned. I don't know what is the correct term would be. Maybe incarcerated or
imprisoned. Or do you mean political imprisonation? Politically motivated? I don't know, incarcerations.
It would be hard to say, right? Because there would be no official numbers of, this is like for political reasons. But maybe like incarceration or just arrested, or no, arrested also wouldn't be the case. So I guess this is where like the whole migrant crisis starts, right? With Lithuania really standing up and being the leader for sanctions against Belarusian regime, and because of exactly what is happening across the board.
And also, I would guess that even if all these unfortunate events hadn't happened, there would have been quite an incentive for people living in Belarus to migrate into an EU country, like economic reasons, other kinds of like political reasons. So before August 2020, was immigration still a big issue? Like, I mean, by immigration, I here explicitly mean immigration into Lithuania from Belarus, or did it become more of like a big issue later on?
But you mean Belarusian people immigration, or
Belarusian people?
I believe that there's efforts to make this procedure easier for Belarusian people, because they are, some of them are skilled workers. There's obviously a shortage of IT people in Lithuania. There's organizations that help find people flats to live in and go through like the procedures of setting up a bank account and so on and so on. I'm sure there's numbers that say how many people, if the migration became stronger, but I believe right now it would be difficult to leave Belarus for people who are not. I think even it's kind of because of the pandemic, supposedly, but I believe the movement of Belarusian people from Belarus is very restricted. So unless you are some kind of official or have, you have a paper that says that you can go.
Right. Yeah. And also, I mean, earlier we were talking about the mood within the Lithuanian political circles towards what's happening in Belarus right now. And what about the other big EU countries? Like, I remember reading as I was like preparing for this conversation that in the mid 2000s, when there were these reports of human rights abuses being committed against Polish people in Lithuania, France supported Poland very vociferously. As in the Poland-Belarus quarrel, France was very strongly on Poland's side. This time, what are they? Do we know, or do you know anything about what any of the big EU powers, like say France, Germany, Belgium, like what are they saying about what's happening in Belarus? I know they are all of the opinion that the election wasn't a fair election and that something should be done. But in terms of concrete actions, do we know what they are planning or what they are saying they will implement?
I don't know exactly, but I mean, it seems to me that Lithuania has been bringing this issue to European Parliament and so on, and leading the way with the sanctions. So the sanctions are, being implemented.
Right.
Yeah, so mostly I think at first it started with certain people, like actual people. After the plane landing, it was, I think, airlines.
Yeah, okay. It was Ryanair, yeah.
But the sanctions, I think, were against maybe Belavia, the Belarusian airline. And then, of course, we saw, we saw planes flying around Belarus and not across Belarus.
Right. Commercial planes aren't entering Belarusian airspace right now.
Yeah, and then so it's, I think it's like, the sanctions have been rolled out. I cannot tell you what exactly they were, but the sanctions also include now the US, which is really interesting. And I actually would be curious myself to know what exactly they are, but I guess it's like the American payments system. Is it SWIFT?
Okay.
I heard something about, but I think in essence, at the moment, the sanctions are to do with payments being processed when it involves, Belarusian companies that are known to support Lukashenko's regime.
Right.
And it seems now, about the situation involving the migrants, it's becoming less clear. While I think what Lithuanian countries, how they view the situation in Belarus, I think more or less European countries agree. And when we move to the migrant situation, it's becoming less and less clear, because it seems that, we are in the middle of it at the moment, and there's not a lot of clear positions being said of what are we going to do about the situation.
Yeah, and also, since you mentioned the European Parliament, I just had a look. The Lithuanian president who was impeached, Rolandas Paksas, is that what the name is? Yes. Yeah, apparently he went on to become a member of the European Parliament, and he remained an MEP until 2019. So, yeah, of course, as we all know, with like Nigel Farage and lots of other people, European Parliament, like the institution of the European Parliament, is a very strange creature. Like all sorts of people get seats there.
Rolandas Paksas is known as the political dead person. I don't know.
Right. Okay. And also, before we started recording, we were talking a bit about the like your personal experience in seeing everything up close, and of course that was the first question. But when you were speaking to people, like in the build up to the protests and during the protests, I mean, were there any plans of specific action, like within Lithuania, or was it just not possible because, like as you were saying, like you were 30 kilometers from the border, but it could, I mean, what you are seeing, what you're hearing, could very well be similar to what someone living a bit further away from the border might see or hear. So, I mean, is that a fair assumption to make, that even people like Lithuanians living in Lithuania who wanted to affect ground level change in Belarus were just not in a position to like do any of that?
I would say so, yeah, because I believe there's there's been money collected, right? There was there was an initiative of just holding hands and showing support. I think Belarusian people really appreciate it, where they see that just there you have a neighbor that supports people. But what can you do, actually? Because any sort of Russia at the time was already saying that countries like Lithuania should not be involved in what is happening in their neighboring countries. Like, what do they think they are doing? What right do you have to do something more than that? So I'm not sure that much else can be done.
And also, I mean, I'm just curious about this. So since Lithuania and Belarus share a land border, when you were growing up, I mean, did you know anything about, I don't know, the culture of Belarus, or movies or films or books that were like based on Belarusian cities or places, and vice versa? Or was it just not that, I mean, or was it just not possible to have that kind of exchange? Because when I think of countries close to uh, the places I have lived in, so for example, I mean, we have a fairly good idea about, let's say, TV shows in Pakistan, and similarly, people in Pakistan have a lot of ideas. I mean, we know a lot about Indian TV shows, Indian movies. I wouldn't say the same is true with, let's say, UK, the UK, and France. But if there, yeah, there are cases where it is true. So, like, people living in Lithuania, like people of our age, like people in their 20s, in their 30s, do they know many? Do they have? I mean, before all this began, I mean, was it usual for them to have, let's say, friends from across the border on Facebook or on any other platforms?
I guess no.
Oh, okay.
And about the like culture, films, and so on, I think it's a very interesting question, because we do sometimes find, like some film festival and you'll see Polish films, right? But with Belarus, and I'm also just kind of speculating, but in Belarus, they have their own language, Belarusian. I guess it's much more similar to Russian than Lithuanian is. So while like my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, they'll really, I would say most of them will be fluent in Russian, right? So, but also I cannot tell you the number, but really they do speak Russian. I haven't really met many older people that don't. Whereas my generation, you will find that a lot of people, maybe they can just read Kirillitsa, the alphabet. Some of them maybe can just speak and not read it. Some of them, are able to speak maybe as well as or almost as well as English, but mostly I would say Russian language is just completely replaced by English at this point. Whereas in Belarus, you see that there is not, arguably because of the involvement with Russia, right? But people speak Russian there. And it would be like in universities, right? And I believe it's just odd if someone speaks Belarusian. So for our generation who don't speak Russian very well, I believe that could be one of the reasons why we don't get sort of that familiar with Belarusian culture.
Right. Yeah, and also, of course, the language is a big issue. And I mean, the Belarusian language and the canonical Russian language, I am guessing, are sort of close to each other, because there was a referendum on whether or not Russian should be acknowledged as a state language in Belarus. I believe this referendum, and this was a referendum in Belarus, and I believe it happened in '96 or something. So the fact that that was a reasonable question to ask is probably evidence of the fact. It's probably evidence that those two languages were relatively close to each other. And also, there is something I just looked up, that regarding migration, there were fears within the Lithuanian political circles that Belarus was encouraging, like unscrupulous people from the Middle East, from Iraq and Syria, to cross into the EU by making it easier for them to first come to Belarus from wherever they were, and then for them to cross the border into Lithuania from Belarus. So maybe, and apparently, again, I just looked it up. In July 2021, there was a law that was passed in Lithuania which made deportation of deportation of illegal migrants from Lithuania easier. And all of this was happening not exactly in the aftermath of, well, maybe technically still in the aftermath of the election, but their point was that we are making this law, we're making this a law so that like Belarus doesn't try to, like send people over who shouldn't be in the EU. Do you know anything about this? Because I'm just reading these sentences and I don't have like an insight. I mean, do you know anything about this migration issue?
Sure. I mean, there is no doubt that this is, has been orchestrated.
Okay.
Question is, I guess, is it whose idea was it? Not that it necessarily matters so much at where we are now, but
Right.
was it Putin? Was it Lukashenko? Because really, that kind of behavior doesn't surprise anyone in Lithuania, at least anymore, right? I mean, you can try and look up the some kind of law changes that Belarus made, and it absolutely is actually in the aftermath of the protest and election, because I think the beginning is that the Lithuania has been, shouting really quite loud about the human rights violations in Belarus, right? And Lukashenko said, okay, let's see how you deal with human rights. It's kind of, so I think it's completely, related, the two things.
Okay.
And in Belarus, some kind of law change was implemented that would make it easier for, I believe, people from Iraq to get a holiday visa for
in Belarus.
7 days in Belarus. There's proof that, and I mean, I am completely certain of it, but there's proof that it's Belarusian travel agencies are actually selling these packets with kind of implicit promise that you will get to the EU this way. So they're operating, in I guess Middle Eastern countries, and sort of selling this fake promise of easy move to EU. So at the moment, there's estimates of thousands or maybe even above 10,000 people in Minsk from those countries. I guess it's Iraq, maybe Syria, but there's also people from North Africa, I believe. Not North Africa, but
North Africa. North Africa. Libya.
Libya, maybe Congo or Kenya. But I mean, of course, among thousands of people, there's Middle Eastern, African migrants. And I believe this has always been happening, but now it's, in amount of people, it's hundreds of times more. And so what happens is that they purchase a visa, they come to Minsk, the number of flights have been increased, to Minsk. And these people come, stay at some hotel, and then with the help of Belarusian officials and army, they are taken to the border. Some of their passports are taken away, and it's really just, it's brutal, because they are taken to the border. And at first they were just being, Lithuania noticed it, I think, it was in spring that the first news started coming out that, we've had 200 people last year that crossed Lithuanian Belarus border. Now we have 200 in 2 weeks. And so these people were, in the summer, these people were just housed in tents. And of course, we don't have the capacity to process everything really fast. And so it seemed like a big issue. But now I think it's thousands, and it's really cold. I mean, let me check. Well, currently in Vilnius, it's 3 degrees. Nighttime temperatures -1, tomorrow -8, Wednesday -13. And, you know, at some point, Lithuania and Poland, because first it was only Lithuania, then it was also Latvia and Poland. At some point, the migrants were turned around. So they would enter Lithuanian territory and they would be walked back into Belarusian territory. I have to believe that, you know, if this happened organically, you know, in 2015, I believe nothing like this would be happening. But now, you know, with some estimates, we have 15,000 people in Minsk waiting to cross the border, and they are not let to go back by Belarusian soldiers. Once they are taken to the forest, they have camps, you know, there's people, and imagine, I mean, it's just completely terrible, right? It's very cold. You are stuck in the middle between 2 countries. You are not let to go back. You're not allowed to cross. It's really cold. There's reports of, you know, physical violence on both sides, you know, either it's Belarus or Poland or Lithuania. It's like a really brutal situation. So, you know, we've seen video footage of, I think it was in Poland, that migrants are in big groups, are trying to, you know, tear down the wall. It's like not a wall, it's a fence, you know, like a metal fence, and it's being you know, pushed down, and they have wire cutters. And where would they get wire cutters from? Right? So it's obvious that Belarus is orchestrating this kind of action by the border, and I believe in their propaganda channels. They are showing, you know, and I mean, it's true that these people are in a terrible situation. And what is being shown is that Lithuania, who is speaking up about human rights,
and now turning back people at the border. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, just think about what a terrible, terrible person you must be. And I'm talking, of course, about Lukashenko, to allow something like this to happen, just to stay in power, to show how strong you are and how everyone must fear of you because you can, you know, start things like that. I mean, it's just awful.
And also it seems to me to be extremely strange that the Belarusian government thought it was worth it for them to do all this so that they could then tell the world or tell Lithuania that, see, you now have a bad human rights record. Like, to do all this, like to make it possible for people to first, as I said, to first increase the frequency of flights from, say, Baghdad to Minsk, or I don't know, Damascus to Minsk, and do all that, bring those people, give them, I don't know, fake passports or take away their passports, and do all that with the sole purpose of like initiating a refugee crisis at the Lithuanian border. It's so strange. One other thing, and okay, we still have a few minutes left. One other thing I wanted to ask you. Oh, by the way, I just checked. 93% of illegally smuggled cigarettes in Lithuania come from Belarus. So that is one export item in which sort of Belarus is really like in the first place in Lithuania. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's quite well known. And I mean, also, either we got better at detecting it, or or it actually increased this year. But it seems that, you know, they'll be bringing, you know, like sort of just wagons of sort of grains or sand, I don't know, like that type of cargo, and there will be just packets of cigarette in there. And it also shows that there's problems on Lithuanian side, right? Because there's someone on Lithuanian side also doing their end of the deal of this, illegal.
Have you ever, I don't know, smoked a Belarusian cigarette?
No, I have not seen, but like myself, but I believe that this market is I don't know where would one go about of getting some, but I believe it probably wouldn't be too hard to find. One more thing that I also wanted to say, as you've said, like it's unbelievable that someone would make these steps of, change the law, start organizing just trips to Minsk and so on and so on. I mean, as I've said earlier, it kind of doesn't surprise us anymore in Lithuania. This is exactly, from Putin's playbook. It's exactly something that he or Lukashenko would do, and then of course completely deny it. And it's also something you can't make this stuff up.
Exactly.
It's just so mad that you cannot make this stuff up.
And speaking of Putin and Lukashenko and the partnership between their countries, it is noticeable that Russia has always remained a staunch supporter or a backer of the Lukashenko regime in Belarus, and it has granted them with various kinds of trade deals, business opportunities, etc. And this seems to be a trend all over the world. So you look at North Korea. North Korea has China doing their bidding. Not exactly their bidding, like giving them business, supporting them financially.
Life support.
So, I mean, do you think this is almost a requirement for tyrannical regimes to exist or to sustain themselves, that they must find a big brother close to them in the neighborhood who will be sort of supporting them? I mean, had Russia not been such a strong supporter of the Lukashenko regime, do you think that regime would have continued its existence until now?
I can't imagine that being so. I would maybe personally look from a slightly different angle of Belarus and Ukraine being like a buffer zone for Russia, of course. And I mean, with there's military activity happening on the border of Ukraine and Russia. And it's just, sort of seems like first signs of something like this happening. So I wouldn't want to go too deep into that. But what Putin essentially seems what he wants is that NATO would stop all and any considerations of ever having Ukraine join the NATO.
The EU, the NATO,
NATO, and I believe he wants it in writing and to be this case forever. So I think it's very important for Russia to have it, or maybe Putin to have these two countries as buffer zones, as just in case countries. And of course, they try to do the same with Baltic countries, obviously unsuccessfully. So I think I would look at it from that angle.
And also in your lifetime,
I guess it's for a regime like Putin's, it's good to have problems happening here and there, right? It takes the attention away from, for example, how badly the pandemic is being managed, and a lot of fake news about the pandemic comes from Russia into Lithuania, and it turned back around against Russia because they have been spreading this, fake news about the vaccines, for example, and we have a very low rate of vaccination in Russia and really big problems. So it's always good, it seems, for Putin to have, problems here and problems there. And with China and North Korea, I'm not an expert, but doesn't it seem like North Korea is like I want to say Chihuahua, if not the nuclear, problems that we have, but it's a sort of China's accessory in a way, to just, sort of, but I think it's sort of similar to what is happening with Belarus and Ukraine.
Yeah, I was going to ask, in your lifetime, say since the 90s until now, or ever since you have been politically aware of, let's say, things happening around you, what do you think, how do you think the relations between, say, your country, Lithuania, and Russia have changed, or, like metamorphosed in the past, I mean, over this period of time? Like, was it ever like very friendly?
It's a difficult question for me to answer, as
Okay.
the independence was regained 1991, and I was born 1993. So then, there's a huge chunk that is actually really quite curious and interesting to me, that I don't actually know what like the mood was and so on. But it seems to me that there's always, I've never thought about it kind of before I kind of moved to the UK, that in Lithuania you're always living with this kind of not fear, but this kind of danger from the east. You always have to be on your toes to see what is going on there, that a person probably wouldn't in the kind of more Western Europe. So from that, I would say that it's always been just being careful and being on your toes about Russia. I can't say, maybe you could say that it's been getting more intense as Lithuania joined the EU, joined NATO before that, I believe, and then sort of really integrated more and more with the West, right? So it seems, and then became sort of more independent in the political thinking. And as I've said, the sanctions, the Belarusian problem has been mostly brought up by Lithuania. Also, recently, Lithuania opened the Taiwanese, not an embassy, but sort of almost like a diplomatic institution.
Yeah.
In Vilnius, and that's beside China, right? So it kind of sent the Lithuanian ambassador from China. So Lithuania has become sort of kind of a loud voice, I would say, in the politics. So I think, if anything, the kind of ties with Russia would be getting, or maybe the mood between Russia and Lithuania would be only sort of downwards, in the downwards direction.
Yeah, and in that, like staying on that topic, like staying on that theme, I mean, what do we think is the future for, let's say, the Belarusian people or the Belarusian political system? I mean, as long as Putin is in power in Moscow, it seems to me that there will be this constant source of, like deep support for Lukashenko coming from Russia. And as long as that remains the case, there will be no hope for protesters or demonstrators or activists or reformers to bring about any actual change. And as long as that, remains the case, that no such actual change is possible, it's just like a very grim reality then.
I think it's true. But because what is happening now is that there's going to be a referendum.
Okay.
In the spring, maybe, in Belarus, to make some changes in the constitution. But I mean, with Russia and, I guess, well, Lukashenko and Putin are very good at doing one thing and saying the complete opposite. And it seems that it could just brush over the problems. I don't know what exactly the changes are, but it seems that it's almost like, is it gonna be rigged, the referendum, or are the changes gonna be so that they will make no change at all? Or on the other hand, it's I'm sort of slightly hopeful also, because you see that in Belarus, for example, just like on a Belarusian subreddit, you can see, people kind of posting about what is happening, on the border from their side, or what is happening in the country. And it really seems to me like either everyone, either people were at the protests, or they know people who were at the protests. It seems that feeling is strong, of wanting change in their country. It's not necessarily that they want to join the EU, or they want to join the NATO, or be in the West, but they, of course, want to have sort of make decisions for their own country. So it seems like the protests have died down, but I believe the spirits are still sort of, they're not crushed. So I'm sort of hopeful, even though, as you said, with Putin in power in Russia, it's difficult to say. And with Lukashenko, is obviously, he's mad, a normal person wouldn't behave like this. So even if he stepped away from power, I think the consensus is that the next leader would also be sort of
that mold,
chosen by Putin.
Yeah. And at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about how elections in Belarus have been consistently not transparent and not fair, going all the way back to the fall of the Soviet Union. How does Belarus compare against the other countries that sort of came out of the Soviet Union, became independent in the 90s, and are now functioning democracies? So do you have any reading on what the or on how the elections in, for example, let's say Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia, how, like, certainly they are fair elections, but there are obviously various degrees of fairness. Like election A can be more fair than election B, and while A and B are both fair elections. So do you know how these countries do on the fairness scale in terms of the elections?
I cannot say, but I believe that, yeah, probably all countries have, some problems like that. But, here we also have maybe in sort of parliament elections, for example, that a person will, drive a bus of old people to the election poll to sort of cast their vote for, someone specific. But at least we have, kind of independent monitoring of the elections and so on and so on. I cannot imagine it being more than some sort of small, tiny sort of tries to rig something. And the fact that it's being found and sort of publicized, I think it's also a good, sign that it's that it's being found out. Whereas, of course, because I don't know if it was 95, as you've said, or maybe 80% vote for Lukashenko during 2020 election, but it's a number that we don't have in any other European country, I guess.
Yeah, those are Saddam Hussein kind of numbers, 94%, 95%. I believe Assad, who is still the president of Syria, there was this one election, you can have a look at it. I think there was an election where he got 98% of the vote. And the point is, like, why even have that? You can just say you're 100%. Yes. So 2021 Syrian election, Bashar al-Assad got 95.19% of the vote. So yeah, there you have it. But well, this kind of behavior, this kind of willingness to show to the world that, see, we are having elections and our leader is still the most popular leader, that is a very strange, let's say, human characteristic. Because if you want a dictatorship, just call your country a dictatorship. Just call your system a dictatorship and be a dictator. Like Mugabe did in Zimbabwe. After Zimbabwe became independent in the 80s, he became a dictator. Lots of people do that. But here they want to act as if their systems are democracies, and they want to keep showing the world that their people, that the voters are consistently and repeatedly choosing them over other candidates. Okay, so let me yeah, come to the last question now, and I think we just hit the 1 hour mark. So yeah, we can maybe stop after we have answered this question. So for people living far from Belarus, say people living in the US or I don't know, England, Scotland, France, Belgium, or even in Asia, what would your advice be with regards to what sort of websites to follow to get authentic news about what's happening in Belarus? Because with many people living far away, very often their YouTube feeds get flooded with, like videos uploaded by the Russia Today channel, RT UK, or just RT.
Yeah, it's so true.
And they're very good at the propaganda game. So yeah, so what are some good channels for this? Good platforms for this?
Maybe I will not necessarily mention some specific channels to follow, but a very good point about RT, whereas you wouldn't even know it's Russia Today, and watch a video that looks completely legitimate and doesn't seem to lie, but the best propaganda is where you say a bit of a lie with a bit of truth. But I think advice would be to know that Russia, not Russia, Putin is just oftentimes he'll say one thing and do another thing. So I guess if you are just reading something that Putin said, or something that is written about him, you have to know that there's mind game is being played with everyone, and propaganda machine is massive, and just to, I guess, verify the information from another source, I guess.
No, but if I am, say, reading the BBC website to get my news on Belarus, am I still getting everything that I need to get, or do I need to? Well, my proposition is not this, that the BBC would lie. My proposition is basically, well, I'm thinking, what if only focusing on Western media outlets gives us a very, let's say, a very distanced view of Belarus or of Belarusian politics? So for example, if I want to, with TV channels, for example, as you know, there is this Euronews TV channel, which I believe is an English news channel, but is run out of France, I think. So if there are elections happening in, I don't know, Portugal, it might be a good idea to watch the Euronews channel instead of the usual British channels, BBC, Sky, ITV. Yeah.
To be honest, I would say that there's not a lot of press going on about this issue. It seems almost now that nothing is happening. And even in Lithuania, we don't, on the border is the state of emergency. So you cannot enter closer than 5 kilometers to the border unless you live there. So really, I am almost missing, information on what is actually happening, like what is happening in Belarus. To answer that question, you can go to the Belarus subreddit, to see, just people accounts from other people. And I mean, I see a bit of a difference from Western press where they say, oh, we don't know if this is Putin or if this is Lukashenko. Whereas for me, it's only a question of whose idea was it first, and how much support does Putin, provide to Lukashenko. Yeah. So I guess, it's true that maybe the Western media will not necessarily know as much as, say, if you read, the news in Russian or Lithuanian. But at the same time, you have Eastern Europe correspondents from, The Economist, the Financial Times. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, The Economist is fairly good on this. Yeah, I've seen that, but it's not free, of course. But yeah, well, thanks, Mantė, again for doing this. And yeah, when we were talking about what could be a topic for this conversation, I just mentioned Belarus, and I mean, thanks again for saying yes to that. So yeah, I will stop recording now, and maybe